You did it at the panel because I watched it on YouTube and you talked about that.
I talked about.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
Good morning, Super
try it
BitCon. Morning.
Hello.
There we go. Well, thanks for coming out. I know the party went all night long after the convention went all day long, and everyone's sort of dragging in a little bit this morning, but I hope everybody's having a good time out here. And our first panel of the day is these three handsome fellas here. We're going to be talking today about video game collecting, which of course is a big thing inside a convention like this, but it's been going on a lot longer than some people may think, and it becomes a lot more detailed and a lot more important as we continue to go on. First, we'll start with some introductions. My name's Patrick Scott Patterson, and I've been gaming since 1981. Consider myself a bit of a historian on this because I've been studying both the backstory of the gaming industry for almost as long as I've been playing games. And over time, I've started to pick some things up, sometimes let some things go and regret it later. So we're out here today to start talking about this, and we'll go on down. You're up.
Hi, folks. I'm Jeff Cooper, and I've been collecting since back in the day, since the early 80s. I guess all three of us would be one man or another of video game historians. I'm a historian literally and figuratively. I'm a professor at Oklahoma State, and I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Brett.
My name is Brett Weiss. In addition to collecting and playing video games, I write about video games. Newest book, 100 Greatest Games from 77 to 87, and which is my favorite era, but also keep up with the modern stuff because I write for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram doing spring previews, video game gift guides, holiday gift guides, things like that. But I've been collecting since the early 80s and playing video games since the mid-70s when Gunfight and Breakout and all those kind of games started showing up at the bowling alleys and pinball arcades. So I go back pretty far. Maybe not as far back as Jeff, but...
And a lot of people these days, collecting has become a big thing. It's become big business. The exhibitor hall yesterday, man, that thing was packed, beyond packed. But, there was a time where people like us were collecting things like video games, video game books, and boxes and magazines, all that stuff, well before we had an eBay, well before we had established collector communities, and we were just a bunch of geeks digging around in thrift stores and garage sales. And kind of like to, get a little insight, because these guys were doing that even before I was. So how do you compare collecting things back then to what has turned into a collecting community now, Jeff?
It was comical back in the day. There were no price guides. There weren't even any rarity guides. I connected with a lot of people through fanzines, and we did a lot of trading, and we sort of did the best we could to be fair with one another because we really weren't so sure about rarity. I do recall once the fanzines got a little bit more popular and I realized I wasn't the only weirdo in the world that was interested in these retro games, the word came down that people were speculating that retro gaming was going to become like baseball cards, that there were going to be price guides, that it was going to be a huge national thing, that these games were going to be worth a lot of money. And all of us, cover his ears, we said, oh, that's such bullshit. That's just a bunch of dealers who are trying to drive up prices and so on and so forth. But now it's happened. So what we have lived through is seeing retro gaming and retro game collecting become very mainstream. It seems like everyone retro games, not everyone is a collector, but everyone is into retro gaming. I go into was getting a routine checkup for an X-ray, and all the technicians and everything are saying, "Oh, Legend of Zelda! Oh, I played that for death! Oh, I just love those old games." So it's been interesting to live through the transition.
Well, I got my first video game system for Christmas of 1982, the ColecoVision. Before that, I'd had just gone to friends' houses and playing their games. Well, when the ColecoVision came out and the Atari 5200, suddenly the Intellivision, Atari 2600 weren't cool anymore. And if you were the kid at school that still had their Atari, you were considered lame. And so when I got my ColecoVision and those systems got popular, the next gen systems got popular, everybody started getting rid of their older stuff. Well, I was more than happy to take it off their hands for very cheap. And all Ataris and televisions, all that stuff started showing up at garage sales. And then in 85 and 86, when the NES came out, suddenly the ColecoVision, Atari 5200, all that stuff was junk. So as soon as nowadays, when the next console generation comes in, people, clamor to collect the older stuff. And, it's considered cool to have several systems or whatever. Back then, you just wanted the latest and greatest system, and most people either put their old systems in their attic, their garage, or throw it out at a garage sale. And so the mid to late 80s, early 90s was just an incredible time to go to thrift stores, garage sales, and everything to collect. And I collected games all along from the early 80s to the present, but there's so many things I've passed up over the years. I can't tell you how many Rob robots and Power Gloves I passed up at Thrift Town and Goodwill for $2, $3, $5, $10 a piece. They were just because I heard the Power Glove didn't work very well. The robot I wasn't really interested in, and so I never got those. Initially when they started dumping them.
And Brett, there was no money factor. You didn't think, well, this is worth $100, so
right,
I got to pick this up for $5.
I bought what I wanted to play, and if I could fill in holes in the collection for cheap, I would do that. Right. But if there was something I didn't want, I didn't buy it. And there was zero, nothing in our minds about anything being worth anything. Right. That was completely a non-factor.
Yeah, I mean, like he's talking about, I mean, we've seen kind of a shift in that, and you can kind of parallel it with what happened to the film industry and memorabilia and stuff that went with that, whereas for X amount of time, the film industry was considered, quick throwaway entertainment. Once something got kind of old, it was tossed out, and this stuff was junked. And the same thing with the video game stuff like they're talking about here. I mean, he's talking about passing things up. I mean, I remember passing up a copy of Stadium Events in a Funko Land in the early 90s, because all I'm thinking is like, they had so many NES games coming into that at that point because everybody was starting to get into the 16-bit stuff. And I remember like, oh, yeah, that corny game, digging around, I'm pulling out other stuff. I still picture it in my mind. Because, yeah, we weren't thinking about that stuff even then. We're like just trying to get some things that we like, maybe we haven't seen before. Because even we, to a certain extent, I think, kind of considered this kind of a, passing thing. Like, we're going to take this opportunity to get what we want. We're not really thinking about a collector's market because there really wasn't one yet.
Right.
Yeah, we just bought one of what we saw. If there were 2 copies of a particular game, no matter how cheap it was, if it was $0.25 or $1, right, we would just get one because you wanted it. There was no, and you didn't really necessarily know anybody to trade with because this was kind of an underground hobby. I didn't know anybody else that collected old video games.
Neither did I.
And like mid to late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't until I discovered like the digital press fanzine and things like that I knew that anybody else in the whole world even collected old games.
Right. We all have our stories. I found 4 sealed stack-ups. They were $4 a piece. He would have taken $10 for all 4 of them. It never occurred to me to buy 2. Why would anybody want 2 stack-ups? I wanted one for my collection, and that was it. And that sort of thing happened hundreds of times.
And this is where the internet kind of changed and shifted this a bit, because I mean, I think the first time I discovered eBay, which was very late 90s, and I actually remember started searching for things that I have, and then I started searching for things that I used to have, and then I started searching for things that I'd seen, and I remember there was a pawn shop that I would go search for old games at, and I remember they had a Vectrex, which was, kind of an all-in-one vector monitor home console. Very highly collectible now. They had that thing in there for probably 4 or 5 years for like $25. And I kept passing it every time I went in there because I never had that. It didn't mean anything to me. And then I looked on eBay at that point and started seeing what they were going for. I'm like, I got in my car and peeled out to that thing. It was gone. Right. Because now people started seeing that there were more of us and there were more things. And, and that's how that's gone ever since. I mean, I was talking with Brett just before the thing. I'm big into collecting video game media, like magazines, old books and stuff, especially before the crash, before the mid-'80s industry crash. So many strategy guides and stuff on Pac-Man and all the hit games of that day, and so much history in those pages. And I used to go in the books in the late 80s and the early 90s, go into used bookstores all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and every one of them would have a huge selection of those things.
Right.
And I took it for granted because I was thinking it's always going to be like that. Now, if I walk into any kind of a used bookstore and even find one that's any older than maybe the 1990s, it's extremely uncommon. And I think to a certain extent, some collectors now that have kind of gotten into this thing in recent times somewhat take some of this for granted as well. I see people all the time that they're, donor carts. They're gutting old cartridges to make home brews, or they're making retrofitting game consoles into toasters and lamps, and doing these things. There's someone I saw on Craigslist down in Houston a few months back. He had 2 Intellivisions, a Dreamcast, 2 PlayStation 1s, the original one, Atari 800 computer, and some other stuff. They all had issues, so he literally is like, free to whoever can pick up today. Tomorrow I'll throw them in the dumpster. And that's something that is actually frightening. It's frightening to me, especially because I've seen this stuff dry up. All 3 of us have seen this stuff dry up. And while it might seem plentiful, anything that seems plentiful now doesn't mean it's going to be plentiful in 5 years, 10 years, especially 20 or 30 years. What do you think on that, Jeff?
We've remarked on this many times. If you've been doing this a long time, you're going to go through this experience. I'm thinking of an Atari game called Beam Rider. We just used to consider it to be a dirt common. And I have a friend who's been looking for one for a long time. He doesn't want to pay a lot of money for it. And he finally scored one. But this was something that back in the day, it just seemed like in any pile of Atari games you'd find that game. So I'm completely on board with you. Another thing that's kind of interesting, I think all 3 of us to some extent collect beyond just games. I know that Brett is very interested in books and magazines, and Scott is, and
random merchandise like cereal bowls and stuff like that.
I started collecting Pac-Man merchandise somewhere around 1989, 1990, and that was just all over the place, and it was dirt cheap, and again, it wasn't anything I did for any reason other than the fact that I liked it. Now a lot of years have passed, and Pac-Man is cool again. Well,
we were collecting before collecting was cool.
Yeah, and so were a lot of people. I think, like I said, taking things for granted. I think another thing, we're kind of reaching a point, too. He brought this up to me a couple nights ago, but it was late last summer, early fall. An old friend of mine reached out to me, and from high school, and he remembered I was into video game stuff, and he went looking for a video game guy because he'd found something, and he found me, and we reconnected. And what it was somebody, this older woman was throwing out all these comic book boxes full of old boxes from Atari games, ColecoVision games, stuff like that. That her late husband, who had died in about the mid-'80s from cancer, he was buying these games, and he was carefully folding them flat and preserving them. He was collecting them way back then. She's finally cleaning out her place, considers them junk, and literally puts them on the curb for trash pickup. And my friend who works for the city happened to come along, see it, went and asked her. She's like, take the stuff if you want. And he called me up, and some of those boxes in there were some of the rarest, some extremely rare boxes that went for hundreds of dollars a piece. I mean, people from all over the world were just going crazy trying to get some of this stuff off of me, and it was this close to going into a landfill. And so this is where, from my seat now, it's great that there's so many people that are collecting these things and stuff like that, but it doesn't mean that it's universally known. Obviously someone's not going to throw out Action Comics #1. Someone's not going to throw out a Babe Ruth autographed baseball. Someone's not going to throw out old Star Wars memorabilia, but there's still people tossing video game stuff now. And I want to know, what are some of y'all's experiences with this, and what do you think needs to change, I guess, in a greater culture to make sure that this stuff kind of reverses the trend and stops getting junked and trashed like this?
I'll tell you one funny story that kind of relates to that. I went to a garage sale just a few years ago when retro collecting was starting to take off pretty well. I go up to this lady. She has Atari 2600 and around 100 cartridges, and she wasn't really eBay savvy or anything like that, but she kind of knew that games were worth a little bit. And she goes, and she wanted maybe about $100 for all of it. And she goes, and I was trying to talk her down a little. She goes, I tell you what, I'm going to keep my valuable ones like Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Defender and all those, but you can have all these weird ones that nobody's ever heard about for, whatever, $20 or whatever. So I got all the rare third-party games for nothing, and she kept her valuable games that are common as dirt.
A theme here is that it's very hard to find stuff these days because there's so much competition. I think all three of us have spent a fair amount of time at flea markets over the course of our lives, wouldn't you say? And back in the day, I was the only one looking. Now I get there early, and there are, at any flea market, there are at least 5 people just like me running through looking for the exact same thing that I'm looking for. So it's a lot harder, but there is still stuff out there. A couple years back, I was at a used game store and talking to the proprietor. This is in the middle of nowhere in rural Connecticut, sort of halfway between Hartford and Providence, very rural. This was a flea market that was in an old abandoned factory building. And I asked the woman if she had any Vectrix, which Scott just mentioned, and she said, no, I don't have anything. But, there's another seller a few booths down who has a store stand. And I said, what are you talking about? I sort of described it, and she said it's about 4 feet high. You put the Vectrex on top, and this is a very rare piece of memorabilia that mainly you see in museums and whatnot, or maybe Jason's place. Yeah, I went nuts because the dealer wasn't there that day, and I kept trying to call him and everything, and I kept thinking that someone's going to swoop by and pick this up. The woman told me he wanted $50 for it. So I was there at the break of dawn the following Saturday. Not only was it there, but it had been sitting there for 4 months. It's just 2 years ago, and hundreds of people walked by it. It meant nothing to it, meant nothing to them. And I think on principle, I bargained the guy down to like $48, just on principle. And then I was walking behind him to pick it up, and he didn't know that I was behind him. He started boasting to other people in the flea market that he had finally gotten rid of that piece of junk. Some idiot had paid him nearly $50 for it. So, as long as you put yourself in a position, and if you keep at it, every once in a while you'll find something.
Going to garage sales, thrift stores, flea markets, and that kind of thing from the mid to late 80s into the early 90s was just incredible.
Yeah.
If you were a video gamer. I mean, I literally found a carload of stuff during the spring and fall, during the height of garage sale season. Anytime I would go out for 3 or 4 hours garage selling, I would literally, it never didn't happen. I would always come home with a carload full of stuff. Boxed Atari 5200, 2 Arcadia 2001s at one garage sale, boxed Odyssey 2. I mean, just you name it, it was available. It was still a little hard to find boxes and manuals at times because so many people just threw those away. But cartridges out the wazoo for $0.25, 50 cents a piece was just so easy to find.
I want to ask a question for both you guys. Back in the day, say money sort of gets into the hobby a little bit, what would be more exciting for you, finding a game that was worth $100 or finding a $100 bill?
Well, I mean, even though a $100 bill, you can do a lot of things with it, and it's always exciting to have one in your hand or in your pocket. You've seen those before. I mean, to me, there's still a certain thrill. My wife's out here; she can tell you what it's like, what I look like when I find something that's like, oh crap! I found a big cache of magazines several months back for way undervalue, mint. I mean, like they don't look like they've been read. We're talking about like the very first issue of Electronic Games, things like that. Which I've had like museum people contacting me, like, you gonna sell that one? No, I'm not. But yeah, I'm like, I just get that, and I'm just like digging around. I'm just putting a stack. I mean, there's just certain. It's like a kid at Christmas type of thing, because it's
more
like
exciting than finding money.
Yeah, because you can always find a way to get $100. You can't always find a mint condition copy of
3 months from now, the $100 bill will be forgotten because it'll be absorbed by bills and eating and all that other stuff. 3 months from now, you'll still have that rare gem in your collection that you may not have paid $100 for, but you're excited about having and finding it.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing too. I think this is where I talked about kind of knowledge of they don't make this stuff anymore. Treat it right. Know what you know. I think another thing too is educate and know your history. You know, a lot of people, there's a lot of younger people that are getting into the retro collecting, and that's awesome. I think that's great. I mean, I know people that are staunch collectors of the NES that are younger than the NES. Yeah. You know, I mean, they were born, and we were already getting in the PlayStation when some of them were born. I think that's great. But then they still kind of don't know their history of it. They know what they're told is rare or what is told is valuable. There's been a lot of talk in recent months, like this is the 25th anniversary this year of the Nintendo World Championships, and how more people seem to know of that as just a rare cartridge than they know the history of that entire competition.
They actually sell a T-shirt of that at Target about that Blockbuster Championship.
Yeah, but I mean it's like there's more people that they'll know the cartridge is rare, but they don't know that the program is probably even more rare, or the T-shirt, the original T-shirts, or even how to identify the reproduction T-shirt from the original one, because there's very big difference. I actually had somebody in Colorado about a year and a half ago wearing one of the repro ones, and he tried to tell me that he got it back in the day in the competition, and I was in that competition back in the day, and I knew he was full of it. I was polite, but it's like, yeah, the original shirt had Donkey Kong Jr. at the top, and for some reason, which was weird at the time, Donkey Kong Jr. was not a big thing in 1990, but the repro ones put Link up there. So if anyone wearing the one with Link at the top tries to tell you it's original NWC T-shirt, they're full of it. But there's people that'll do that too. So you don't want to cheat yourself out of something if you're worrying about value. You also don't want to pass on things. You know, I think know your history. I think it's great that the people are collecting it, but I think to fully appreciate it and to know when you're seeing something like the story you told, I think it's important to know what you're looking for and to know what's out there and to know what the history is. And don't be afraid. You don't have to collect just what's trendy. I mean, the coolest things I got in my collection recently was business cards. One from Bill Kunkel and one from Jack Trammell, which was, the guy that, controversial, kind of a polarizing figure that ran Atari for a while. But to me, having those business cards is cooler than having most of the stuff I've seen in that thing over there. But that's to me because I've read the history, and some other people, they pass that up all day.
Yeah, I think if you're going to be a serious advanced collector, you have to have a lot of expertise, especially in this environment.
Because if you don't know what you're looking at, somebody else behind you is going to come in, and they're going to know what they're looking for.
You should read up on the subject.
Yes, no, his books are a great resource. They absolutely are. Do not consider Wikipedia and gaming blogs to be as good of a source as sources like Brett's books or several documentary film World 1-1, things like that have come out. They're going to be far greater resource for actually learning the real accurate history of this stuff.
I would also point out that if you're going to be serious about collecting, it's going to require a lot of effort.
And patience.
And a lot of patience and a lot of time. 90% of the time, if you go to a garage sale, a flea market, or whatever, you're going to just strike out. So you sort of have to ask yourself whether or not you get a thrill in just the hunt. If it's going to bother you to try over and over and keep striking out, then I think you need a different hobby.
Well, and I think patience is key. We, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of people that are into it now that more than ever before. There's also a lot of people that still aren't aware. They don't look at old video game stuff as having value or being collectible or being of importance to anybody. So this is a unique time where if you're patient, you can still get deals. 10 years from now, I don't think that's going to be the case. 10 years ago, it was a lot easier to be patient. Right. But it's like, be patient. If there's something you want, wait it out. Obviously, if it's something truly rare, like Air Raid for the Atari or a Nintendo World Championships cartridge or something like that, you're only going to have so many to choose from. But, sometimes there's still gold. I think about, 2 years ago, that young woman that went into Goodwill and found the box stadium events for $8. That would have been awesome. She knew what she got and got out of the store. I probably would have spent all of that on recovering from the heart attack I would have had from finding that in the Goodwill. But that's what it is.
So, Brett, tell us what it's like to hunt and hunt and hunt. How you feel when you strike out?
Well, I think of gas money for one thing. And one thing, though, when I go to all these places, I'm also looking at other departments. You know, I might find something I can sell on eBay that's not even related to video games, or I might find something I know of. You know, I find something for someone else. You know, that just so it kind of helps if you have a wide range of interests. You can, you know, I found a good leash for my dog for $1 at a garage sale. You know, the extendable one that's $15 in the stores, it's $1 at a garage sale. So it helps when you're taking your time, gas money, and all that into consideration. You know, you're on the lookout for games, but you know, it's kind of cool if you're kind of keeping out for other stuff too. Kind of makes the time and money work. You know, makes it a little more worthwhile.
Well, there's two things I can think of too. Like right now, you've got a big collecting craze with some of the modern stuff. I'll flat out say it. I'm about to put out a thing online where I really say it. I think amiibos are going to be the Beanie Babies of this video game generation.
Yeah.
I think that right now, you get a rare amiibo or what's considered rare.
Sell it.
Yeah, sell it or trade it for something that is not as common now. Because down the road, that's not those things are going to be worth $10 a piece at best. 10, 15, 20 years from now. I promise you, I've seen this. I used to do collectible toys. I've seen them with starting lineups, with Beanie Babies, with the Death of Superman comics.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the things that become valuable, most valuable, are the things that people use and toss and get rid of. The stuff that people keep, especially keep mint and package, that's the stuff that does not hold value because everybody has it. So there's opportunities there. If maybe you can't hunt for your older stuff as well, hunt for the new stuff that people see valuable and use that to get the older stuff. Another thing is, and this is contrary to popular belief, you can still find deals on eBay if you are patient and consistent. Usually looking
knowledgeable.
Usually looking at newly listed for buy it nows or things that ended in off time. I think about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I saw somebody had just listed a whole lot of what they considered miscellaneous NES era junk, papers and stuff. They put a buy it now at $22 up there, and included in that lot were 6 issues of Warrior World newsletter, which was put out by Enix before anyone knew who they were. You had to write them a letter and mail it off requesting to get this sent to you. Those are worth about $1 to $1.50 a piece to a collector. They're extremely, extremely rare. I got the whole lot and other stuff for like $22 because this guy didn't know what he had, but also because I got on there maybe 3 minutes after he listed it and saw that and went click. You can still get that. It takes a lot of checking and again a lot of patience, but don't overlook eBay as a source if you want to try and snag something.
Don't overlook newer games either. Like if you go to garage sales, just hunting for Atari, Coleco, and all that stuff, kind of hard to find nowadays. But if you research and know what GameCube and Nintendo 64 games are worth a lot, you can make, you can do pretty well. Just, a lot of moms will just, when their kid outgrows, their Zelda games or Mario games or whatever for N64 and GameCube, they'll just throw them out in the garage sale for $1 a piece. Pokemon, know what games are worth a lot of money, and those are pretty ripe for the pickings. That's usually what the really good finds I've made lately have been for those systems.
That's true. I've noticed over time a consistent thing is you love the story of my kid's grown up and moved out or left this behind. My kid's gone off to college and needs money. And the stuff that they had growing up is the stuff that they dump. A lot of times that stuff is the stuff that either becomes valuable later or is more rare than they realize now.
And you're not going to find it if you're not at that garage sale or if you're not at that flea market. And so we come back to the trying to put yourself in a position where something good will happen.
So we're going to flip this and see if there's any questions with the minutes we have left. Any questions or input or anybody from anyone out here? Guys got the Bob Barker microphone over here. If anybody wants to ask anything of any of the three of us or all of us, shoot, I'll get a hand up over here. Go talk to him, Bob. Help control the pet population.
What makes an item a collectible?
I think a collectible, there's not one blanket answer, but because sometimes rare things are not worth much, and sometimes things that aren't rare are worth a lot. Sometimes it's perception. I don't think Little Samson on the NES is near as rare as people say it is, because all the diehard NES collectors I know have one, or two, or three, or five. but it's perceived as rare. I know stuff that is super rare, like the magazines and stuff I try to collect. No one seems to care. I think the ultimate thing of collectible is if something was popular once, it's going to be popular again at some point in time when the nostalgia kicks in. Some people get a little older, they start to wax nostalgic, they have a little extra money. They want to get that stuff back. It reminds them of maybe a simpler time or a good memory in their life. And that is the stuff that tends to be collectible, or things that become pop culture, which is what video games have done. Video games are now as big a form of entertainment as movies and television and music and anything else. They gross more than all of those put together. And that is something. And a lot of times this is stuff people use up and throw away. Like I said, the stuff people keep saying, this will be worth something someday, and they stash it, that stuff is almost never worth anything because everyone did that.
If people want it, it's collectible.
Yeah, I was just going to say desirability, because there are a lot of really rare items that nobody wants, and it's not worth anything. But a lot of it just has to do with the desirability, and if that's a particularly... one thing cool about video games, the ones that go up in value tend to be the ones that people like to play. That kind of separates itself from a lot of other collectible some of the other collectible markets. With video games, it's usually the titles. I mean, there are exceptions like some Atari 2600 games that were produced late in the life of the system, and they just happen to be rare, and people want to fill holes in their collections. But so much of the stuff that people just love, like Gunstar Heroes for the Genesis, I picked up my complete in-box copy at Funko Land right before they became GameStop for $2.99. Now that game has developed such a following, and it's just such a great game. It's surely over 100 and complete.
I think another great example would be Contra for the NES. It's a very, very common game, but consider what that would cost complete and mint in the box. I don't know, but it would be a fortune, and it really doesn't have that much to do with rarity, but virtually everybody loved that game, and it's highly sought after.
Another thing I can think of is in the arcade collecting market too, whereas Ms. Pac-Man was the best, hands down, the best-selling arcade game in North American history. It said almost 119,000 units sold. It was also one that had such a long lifespan. Less Ms. Pac-Mans were converted or destroyed than a lot of other old arcade games, and yet someone that used to be in that market, used to buy and sell those things, you could always sell a Ms. Pac-Man for a high amount of dollars like that, even though you can find them plentiful. There's two in the next room. Whereas some truly rare arcade games from that same era that maybe were produced in, this in the few thousands range, and maybe you can find a couple dozen of them out there, are only worth a few $100s. It's a big supply and demand type of thing, because people will forever love Ms. Pac-Man, but they might not have ever heard of these other games, and so that's what it is. Rarity doesn't always dictate value. A lot of times it just really comes down to this basic economic supply and demand.
You're not going to get a ton of money for a nibbler, I don't think. But
no.
But
maybe
you can always
when the movie
sell Ms.
comes
Pac-Man, and now I think that games like Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, they'll go high dollar if you can find one in great condition.
Or Donkey Kong's gone up because
they're out there, but it's now it's hard to find them in really pristine shape.
Absolutely. We had another. I saw your hand go up. Oh, this will be a good one.
What do you guys think about the new trend, like super high priced games, and a whole lot of games are becoming unobtainable because of price? Do you think it's going to help our hobby grow, or do you think it's going to slow it down when some people realize things are just too expensive to collect for?
Well, I do see a little bit of concern. A little bit of my concern is, like you mentioned comic books earlier. I mean, we've seen, comic book market, collector card market, things like that come along where everyone starts thinking all this stuff can be really valuable, and they start to inflate the prices on everything, and eventually the whole thing caves in, and even the stuff that really was rare drops in value dramatically. But I think one thing that video games have that those don't is, by their very nature, video games are there to be played and be used, so they're still going to get worn. They're still going to get enjoyed. Me, I've never been able to get into baseball card collecting because it's like, okay, I've got a little piece of cardboard with a baseball player on it, sealed in carbonite here, and I can look at it a few times, and that's neat. Video game, you're always going to be able to play it and enjoy it, And by its very nature, that's going to bring out some more nostalgic feelings and give you an experience, but you're also still using and consuming that product. So they're still going to decline in number and condition a little bit.
I think another factor is the comic book industry was pretty much ruined by baseball card dealers speculating on new issues. Baseball card dealers, there were shops all over the country, were suddenly buying up special editions, #1 issues and everything, and they artificially inflated the market. But when the market collapsed, it went back to just readers, and so you had an artificially inflated market. You don't really have in an industry like baseball card dealers who are suddenly jumping on board video game collecting that are going to artificially inflate the industry. I think inflated video game prices are done, 99% is that by people who love the games and want them either through nostalgia or just newly, just discovering them. So I don't think you have a parallel industry like the baseball card industry that helped destroy the comic book industry. I don't think you have an industry that's right alongside the video game industry that's going to make game prices or collecting collapse.
I think another thing that our hobby has going for it is that there are different levels of collecting. There are people who collect only games that they want to play, good games. There are people who collect only cartridges. There are people who want things in the box. There are some people who are willing to pay a lot more for a really good box and a warranty card. I'm not one of those. And then there's the whole market now of people who want the sealed stuff. And so, I have my own niche. I like stuff in the box. I don't really care about sealed games, and if I had a lot of money, I'd never buy sealed games. So I think that's also going to help the hobby.
Well, and I think too, like sometimes you got to look at where some of these prices are. Like I think right now, I have a good friend of mine had a huge NES collection, and he was looking at some money, and he looked at what he paid for it, and he's like, well, should I hold on to this stuff or whatever, or should I sell it? And I was like, sell it now, because 5 years, 8 years, 10 years from now, he's going to be able to buy it all back for way less than it is right now, because right now, NES is considered hot. I know a lot of people that are trying to collect every NES game there are, and some of them are getting there. The thing is, once they get there, well, then what do they buy? Now they have all this stuff. The thrill of the hunt is now gone, and somewhere they're going to come along and look at, I would rather have a car or a better place to live or a family vacation. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. I'm going to sell it. That market's going to hit a wall and shift back down. And generations seem to move. I'm starting to see a little uptick now in like some PS1 stuff, things like that. I'm starting to see that tick up a little bit now.
I think, though, that's a matter of debate. I look for comparison at the Atari market. I thought that Atari was inevitably going to die. Well, we're all getting old at some point, and the people who grew up with Atari are going to be off the planet at some point. Really? In my experience, I think the cartridges sort of peaked and then they kind of dropped down a little, but not so much for the stuff that's in the box. That's pretty much held its value, and with all the fuss over the E.T. dig last summer, there's been more of a resurgence of interest in Atari. So year after year, I keep thinking the bottom is just going to fall out of this. I just haven't seen that happen yet, so I'm not quite so sure that that's going to happen. Well,
I compare the NES and the Atari like Golden and Silver Age comic books. Those, throughout all the ups and downs of comic books, those have held steady and just continue to go up.
Yeah, they're going to hold a value. Sometimes they're going to dip, but they're not. There's going to reach a point where they're not going to go up.
I would agree with that.
And I think Jeff also does point out something I meant to point out earlier, and then we'll get to one more and we get a wrap. Is sometimes there are the outside influences too, like the big Atari dig, and I don't even know how that became an urban legend. I think all three of us knew Atari dumped a bunch of stuff there, and it wasn't even the only place they dumped stuff. But somehow it became an urban legend. Thank you, Internet. And a big thing came up. And so, I mean, heck, you talk about Atari. I've seen ET cartridges, like ones that weren't buried in the earth, go up in value a little bit. sometimes you have things like that. The old Seinfeld Frogger episode made Frogger arcade games shoot up in value for a little while. And they never really came back down to what they used to be. I think a lot of these documentary films now, I think, are feeding that. I think that when the Nintendo Quest film comes out, if you can get the good distribution, that's going to give a little bit of a thing with that. I think pixels will have an impact, especially Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, the stuff that's really up there. But sometimes there is an outside influence. If you like to speculate, sometimes that's something to speculate on. Look at what's coming and, throw a flyer out there. Doesn't always work. I thought Ecstasy of Order might be a big hit. Didn't get good distribution. I'm going out buying NES Tetrises. Didn't work out. I didn't lose any money. Didn't make any money. But we got time for one more. This friendly gentleman, look right here.
So, wow, I'm not used to hearing myself. What are your thoughts on the people who are like buying the 3DS from Majora's Mask and then just instantly selling it for like twice the value?
Good for them. That's capitalism. I know some people don't like it, but you know what? If I walked into a store right now and found 10 rare amiibos that I could double or triple my money for, I would do it right then. It's not like they're not artificially inflating the market like some people think. You can't do that with a mass-produced thing like that unless you have tens of thousands of people doing it or what have you. I used to get this when I was in doing the toy collectible market, and supply and demand. I'm not withholding medical supplies or food or something like that from people and inflating the value. It's like if this costs 20 in the store and someone's willing to pay me 50 for it, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and we like having electricity and food, and I'm not going to hesitate.
I would say that I simply don't regard those people as game collectors. They're just, resellers. I guess
filthy resellers.
What I would toss out there, what about people who are fabulously wealthy, and their idea of collecting is simply running out there and dropping $1,000 on this game and dropping $5,000 on that game? Are they really collecting? They're just buying a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, my opinion is, if I go to Walmart and I see something that would cost me $100, and I know a buyer that will pay me $300 for it, if I go to a garage sale and see something that's $100 and I know a buyer that'll pay me $300 for it, I'll buy it both times and make the $300.
Yeah,
it's me.
I would too.
Yeah, I mean, I see people. I used to get this Star Wars action figures. I remember, Star Wars Episode 2 figures came out. I think it was Count Dooku was the short pack in the first run, and I'll walk into a Walmart, and they just restocked it. There's 20 of them. Yes, I bought all 20 of them, and yes, all 20 of them went to eBay. And I got criticized for that. Well, you should have left some behind for some other people. Why am I going to do that? I mean, I could buy them for $7. They're going for $40 average on eBay. I'm not going. If you go around the corner over there and you find a wallet on the ground and it's got $2,000 in it, you're not going to leave $500 of it on the ground for the next person to come up behind you and get. That doesn't make any sense. So that's how I look at that. Like, I'm looking at $40 and $50 sticking on these toy pegs. I'm going to grab them and I'm going to do what I can. But the thing is, this is where we talked about patience. Now you probably couldn't get retail price for that same figure. Yeah. So I mean, people's impatience, whatever. I mean, and the thing is that how you know the person that comes up behind you is not going to do the same thing if you don't. So
but
I mean,
again, I would say that the whole question is not the whole question. It's a good question, but the whole topic is out of the realm of collecting. I think that reminds me of people. There was a shortage of PS2 for a while, and there were people who were buying every one they could get, and then they were reselling them on eBay at double and triple the cost. That's just a different issue.
Yeah, I did that. I got a PS2 shortly after it had come out, and I looked at it, and I was like, I have no games for this, and I can double it online by the end of the week, and I did. And you're not going to find someone that's a more diehard gamer than I am, but I'm sure I turned around and spent most of the rest of that on games. But that's how it is. So anything else? We'll squeeze in one more quick one if anyone's got anything. And not you, son. I'll talk to you later.
How do you feel about emulation? What is it going to do to the market?
Well, I get extremely strong about that. You know, you call it mutilate. That's how I look at it. It's like they don't make this stuff anymore. It might seem like there's plenty of NES zappers out there. There were a lot of them made. They're not that hard to find. That doesn't mean I want you to turn it into a lamp, because when I'm, all this time has passed, they don't make them anymore. Down the road, that's going to seem like a really foolish thing. It's just like you look at a national resource. I'm not saying that this is important to saving trees or oil or something like that, but again, they don't make these things anymore. And I'm pretty sure that if somebody was using an Action Comics #1 for target practice, somebody would be upset about this. Gamers seem to sometimes accept and even encourage it right now, and I think that sometimes, does affect, because you're still destroying something. I've seen it with the arcade market. You used to be able to find vintage arcade games all over the place. They used to be easy to find the parts for them. Even in recent years, people are taking arcade games that survived from 1982, 1983, and gutting them and turning them to multicades and MAMEs and other abominations. And what have you had? Now you have an arcade market that you can't find some of this stuff like you could 5 and 10 years ago. And I remember when people were doing it, I'm telling them that. They're like, whoa, well, they made 20,000 of this game. Yeah, in 1983. Maybe there's a few hundred or maybe 1,000 at best left at that point. Now you've dwindled that number down even more. All you got to do is just look at human history, animals and resources or anything else. There used to be tons of Action Comics #1s. There used to be tons of Topps Baseball Card Series #1. They had warehouses full of those they couldn't get rid of. Think about the long term, and if you really love gaming, in my opinion, you don't mod or junk or trash or whatever something, even if it's not working, even if you think they made plenty of them. You preserve it. Y'all got anything to add on that?
Well, Jeff or James or whatever you want us to call you, we both have booths out in the buying area. Feel free to stop by our tables. Jeff has a lot of boxed NES stuff. I'm promoting my book, so feel free to stop by and say hey. And I appreciate you guys coming out and listening to our panel.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep. Find me on Twitter, Original PSP, or on my website, PatrickScottPatterson.com. Do these all over the country. Support this guy, man. This guy makes some great books. There's no one else besides. I'm not talking about the Insecticon, but
I happen to have a pen handy right here.
Support guys like this that are truly about preservation, celebration of this hobby, and know your history. Thanks for coming out, and have fun the last day of Super BitCon, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, look at my son.
Dad, can I have some ice cream?
Yeah, Dad.